Welcome to the Shortwave Show. Yes, it's a little bit past 7 p.m. on the East Coast, and I'm here yapping with you yet again. I know some of you are happy to see me. Maybe some of you aren't, but that's okay. I am more exciting than the boring stuff going on Twitter right now. If any of you have been in the Twitterverse, I am actually more exciting than that, so you should be watching me happily. I have a very interesting show today, a topic that I think many of us have felt or are feeling even now. And it's the idea of how in the world do we get past some of this political apathy? And this is left, right, center, everything. People just kind of surrendering and giving up, talking about doing things locally, but not actually doing anything locally except just some talk. And I'm bringing somebody on tonight who is talking about getting around that locally, collectively, and actually getting past just the talk and trying to do something. He is an activist, a PhD student, and director of organizing at Vocal New York, Jawanza Williams. How are you?
Hey, I'm well. Thank you so much for having me. I deeply appreciate it. And hello to everyone who is watching or will see this later.
Excellent. So the thing that really got me was your idea of how do we get past political apathy. And I think most people think it's at the top, right? It's getting a cool presidential candidate. It's getting, Donald Trump or Bernie or Marianne Williamson. It's getting somebody cool to the top. And that's the way we fix this. But you don't think that. You think it's more of a local way of making this happen. Why did you go that route versus thinking, hey, let me get behind some heavy hitter who's going to be a star?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that I think that there needs to be a multidimensional, multi-layered response to what's going on in our society right now in the United States, okay, and really across the West writ large. But what I will say too is that, one, I don't know if I totally accept the premise of there being a wide problem with political apathy. Now, do I think that people are disillusioned? Yes. Do I think that people are experiencing incredible economic and social anxiety, which is the direct result of neoliberal public policy and sort of like political frameworks and the stories that we tell about our society and about why we are the way that we are, why resources are distributed in the way that they are distributed or not, for that matter, and the fact that we have the plutocracy taking over every institution, all of the fundamental institutions that we're using for the last 247 years to try and realize some degree of democracy. Now, we both know, and we all know that sort of like access to democratic protections and democratic institutions is not equitable. So that's a reality too that we're dealing with. But the reason I'm always thinking about
hold on. Let me see if I got this clear. What you're saying is this is actually this is a massive problem. The plutocracy is controlling everything. So maybe there is also a place for the popular person, right, to pop up. You're saying it's the popular person could work and local could work. Is that where you're going with?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that with our two existing capitalist establishment political parties, that there are limits to what we're going to be able to do because we fundamentally challenge the way in which they want the world to operate through the status quo. So do I think that we just say, you know what, buck electoralism, I don't care about Congress, I don't care about the Senate, I don't care about city or state government? I think that that's a mistake. And I think that whenever we develop, especially as a leftist, and I'm a leftist socialist, democratic. And I think that when you're accountable to a base of people, in particular poor people, poor and working people who need the social and economic supports that sometimes do come through democratic establishments, to just say that that's meaningless, I think is disconnected from people and disconnected from the constituencies that you may believe you're operating in the interests of. So I'm saying all of that to say that I think what we need, again, is a multidimensional strategy. So number one, we do need to try to mitigate the harms coming from establishment parties by engaging with the capital S state. And number two, though, we need to build the kinds of organizations, the kinds of networks of like organizations, political groups, social movements, alliances, coalitions that are going to help us, actually be able to leverage some kind of coercion without
So hold
violence.
on. Let me touch that if I could. All right. So are you saying the groups that you want to build? And this is the thing that I think I noticed that you said that a lot of people don't say. Most people talk about just deconstructing, tearing it down, ripping it down, which from my feeling, and maybe I'm old, but I feel like that's scary. Like people get scared when you say that, right? But you don't. You just said it now. You got to build stuff. You're about building stuff. So are the things you want to build, are those working alongside government? Are those parallel to government? Both mixed? Is it simple as supporting a local church? Is it supporting an American Legion? Is it rebuilding an entire organization?
I think that you have to sort of think backwards. The thing that transforms the world is not individual leaders like me. It's not individual organizations. It's not elected officials like Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, or any of them. They have impacts. Of course, we can have significant, meaningful impacts. But what really transforms the world, which means to transform people and the way that we interact with each other, how we understand ourselves, how we locate ourselves throughout history in the world, is through social movements. And social movements have to be waged by human beings. And those human beings have to be alive and well, and at least out of crises enough to be able to have the leisure to engage politically. So again, leisure in the 21st century, when we're talking about it today, we're thinking about, I'm going to go to the movies. I'm going to lay on my couch and have a good time. I'm going to go to the beach. That's fine. That's good. We need those recreational activities for our own mental health, and also just for our own interests. But when I say leisure in this context, what I mean is that we need, as working class people, because most of us are working class, and I don't even like the middle class term. We are working class, and some of us have high or middle incomes, but most of us don't. So there's one word.
Let me touch it before you go further. Do you accept the term of the PMC, professional management class? Do you accept that term as working class? Do you not accept that term? Is that term more elitist? Where do you fit when you're talking about class? Where does that fit for you?
Yeah. So here's what I primarily think. I think that it is a capitalist plot to break up the working class movement. I think we want to think more big tent. Now, are there high income working class people? Sure. But I guess the best way I've heard it said, that I think I'm always sort of grappling with, because this is a question I have too, is that we determine our class not on our income, not on how much money we have or what we own or we don't own. We determine our class based on our relationship to production. If I get up every single day to make a paycheck to pay for my life, I'm working class. If I don't, and I make other people work for me, that's different. So I think that there's this sort of ambiguity there, but I think that the ambiguity is sort of stalling this moment that we're having, where we're seeing in this country right now, a revitalization of unionization, where we're seeing this sort of hyper consciousness raising taking place, which is why the right wing is attacking constantly, saying woke this, woke that, as if it's a problem to have consciousness, to be aware and responsible about our ideas and the way that we say things and how we refer to people. Like we want to talk, I often help the people define politics, because when you say you think that people know what you're talking about, often they don't. And for me, I think at the root of it all, politics is simply about how do you describe the world that you're in and the one that you want to be in. What are the values there? Our politics are how we describe the world that we're living in and the one that we're trying to build. And our values tell us why. So I think that
so hold on. So you don't if I'm hearing you right, you don't actually believe in a simple left-right paradigm. You think there's something else in there besides just I'm left, I'm right. There's something else in there, or do you think your values are left, right?
I think that I am definitely a leftist, but to be leftist is a location in the context, in the sort of spectrum of ideological sort of frameworks that we're living in. So I'm using the framework of left versus right because the left ideas tend to be aligned with the values that I have, I think naturally, just from my identity, from my experiences in life, where I grew up, the things that have happened to me, the things that I understand. So I absolutely identify as a leftist, but again, I think that what I really care about is about realizing egalitarianism, about advancing life, as Kwame Ture would say. Like the whole point of life is to advance and improve the quality of life for everyone. So like, what are the kinds of cultures? What are the kinds of systems that we're going to need to build? What kind of governments are we going to need to craft if we need governments? And this is another question I have right now. Like, at this stage, you have to call me a statist. I believe that we do need a state. Like, I believe in mutual aid networks, for instance, and I also believe that food stamps is mutual aid scaled up. So let me touch that piece. I love that. So that was my actual question. We got there. Good. So you're okay with mutual aid societies, and you're okay with EBT. Like, both of those are good in your world. So you're not necessarily having a parallel, but maybe even it could work together in theory. Yeah, as vehicle to something else. Because remember, the food stamps only have to exist because in the ways in which we have marketized the very things that we need to sustain ourselves as human beings. Because we can't all go out and be farmers. That's not going to work. There's too many of us. So like, I don't like so much the idea. I think it's okay for people to be equipped to be able to grow food. I don't like the idea that somehow we should all just be growing our own food. I guess what I'm trying to say ultimately is not those details, because I'm not a farmer. So that's not my world. And I don't want to pretend I know something I don't know. But what I do know is that I am okay with food stamps. I think that they're important, but that's because I think that people need to be alive to wage a social movement that calls for food to be free, that we shouldn't be paying.
So what if we were to, and maybe this is something that you're against, but what if we were to say, look, I don't want people to get EBT or WIC or any of those things. I don't want people to even have a living wage. What I want them to have is just a living income. Like a UBI or a negative income tax or something like that, to where you just get that. You get the money to where you will be alive, right? Here's the money. We've marketized everything. So here's the money so that you can have basic necessity and you'll be alive. And now you can decide what's that next step. Is that a kind of thing that you'd be okay with, or you don't think that's the right answer?
I think that those, like, for instance, I'm a proponent of universal basic income, of course. Like, I think that if we're going to have to deal with these fundamentally death-dealing structures and the cultures that result from them and practices and customs that the world that we're living in requires that we have cash to live. So I don't want us to get stuck there. I think it's a vehicle as we dismantle what needs to be dismantled and build what needs to be built. There are institutions.
You think UBI is not the end? UBI is a bridge in your view.
Exactly. Just like socialism. It's a bridge. It's a vehicle. We're going somewhere else. We're going to somewhere that's hard for us to imagine, because I don't know if it's ever existed. The kind of, because we're different kind of people at this sort of like later stage is the way that I think about it. And I think that there are scientific ways that we can move ourselves in a direction. That's connected to the abolitionist conversation too, about prisons and police. It's like, do I think that today that every prison should be shut down and like people should just like do whatever they want to do? No. Do I think people should be set free? Absolutely. Do I think that people need the infrastructures of care? And that means many things, multidimensional as well. Like, what are we going to do to transform the people where there are actual problems so that we can begin to mitigate and or eliminate some of the bigger problems that come to your mind when you think about abolishing prisons, when you think about abolishing police?
So hold on. I don't want to walk down the prison piece yet. I want that so badly, but just not now. I want to stay in the one piece we brought up. The thing that I'm hearing now, and I think I'm a little worried, this is my fear. If we go down a UBI road, yes, I think we would have enough money for people to survive. I think that's true. I think that will happen. My worry, though, is now will they be motivated to still create those organizations to go to that next level, right? I mean, in your view, if I understand you correct, even socialism is just a way to something else. Almost, if I understand what most hardcore leftists believe, and you'll tell me if I'm wrong here, is that the end game is actually like almost like an anarchy in a way, to where we're all free on our own. That's the long-term end game. Am I reading you right or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. You know, I think for me, I would call that anarcho communism. I'm not sure that I'm an anarchist. That's why I was saying earlier about states. I think we do need a state. I think that the communist future that I imagine is a classless future, not necessarily a stateless.
Classless.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that the question of like, concern about motivation to transform the world being sort of like stifled, eliminated because people have what they need to be sustained, I think is that hasn't happened, and I don't think it's going to happen. And so I don't even want to entertain that idea necessarily, because I think that we don't actually know what people are like, in mass, whenever we don't have to think about how am I going to live. Like it's a daily occurrence. Even if you're a working class, stably income person, like you're still having to calculate, okay, I got to pay this, etc. Like, what would it look like? I think more imaginatively. Like, one of the things that I really appreciate about Angela Davis, who I think is the person I read this from, is that we need to unshackle our imaginations. And I think that means, again, that how we are today, remember, it's located in the fundamental structures and practices of the society right now. So people are responding to these dynamics. If we transform these dynamics, we respond differently. Therefore, we are different. So, like,
but don't we have an example of this, though? I mean, if I look at, say the aristocracies of, say, the 19th century and part of the 20th century, but most of the 19th century, weren't they kind of maybe a sample of people who didn't have to worry about living? Like, they were good, right? They were fine. They were the aristocracy. They were the princes and the kings and the queens of Europe. Isn't that kind of isn't that a population of people we can look at and say, if everybody's safe, then it's them?
No, I think the issue with them, just like the aristocracy here in the States, the enslavers, is that if your sort of economic and social security is rooted in your being sovereign over a people who have, who are ultimately being dominated and who have not given actual consent to be governed. Here's where, in a sort of classical sense, I'm a Republican. It's like, well, I want to self-govern, and I want to be with other people to self-govern. And so I don't want a king. I don't want a queen. I don't want anything like that. And I don't want to have my freedoms at the expense of other people's freedoms. So, like, so I don't think we've had it. That's what I'm saying. I don't think we've had it. But also, we haven't been at this stage in our development. One of the good things about capitalism, which there are very few, is that even if it's created all of this devastation that is literally threatening, like, human annihilation, all life, in fact, that's where we're at right now. Like, I mean, it's not a game. We have developed new technologies. We have developed new ways of thinking, new ways of seeing, new ways of being together, how we're in this conversation right now. Is that the result of capitalism? I don't think so. I think it's the result of human innovation, and capitalism is the vehicle that we're forced to use at the moment. So my point is, like, it hasn't all been doom and gloom for the last 300 years. There are new things. There are good things. And a lot of these things we've never had. So, like, what would it look like for us to employ our latest technology, our latest understanding, our latest practices, our highest scientific knowledge, not to build bombs, but to build new ways of organizing our society? And sometimes the reason why that sounds so fluffy to people.
So hold on. Let me see if I get this down. So when you say technologies and different, do you mean actual technologies like the blockchain, like that kind of technology? Or do you mean like the way we think now? What do you mean when you say technologies?
Well, I don't mean the blockchain. I think we should be getting away from technologies that require us to use massive amounts of energy when we don't have the renewable energy infrastructure to be able to manage that over time. But what I do mean like the fact that we can talk to each other at any moment if we want to, even though that's not equitable totally across the planet. But that's important. I don't even know if we fully grappled with this in the last 30, 40 years. of how connected we are. Only in the last 10, 15 years have we really been like, I can video call someone at any moment around the planet and soon to be off the planet. And I think, so like, what are the applications of that beyond just social media, beyond just entertainment, that we can use and we're not using yet? I don't know what those things are. And that's what I'm saying. Like, one of the things about collectivism that I deeply respect and appreciate is that I don't have to have, and I shouldn't have, all of the answers. Because when I imagine the future that works for me, it might not work for you. So we need to be in some kind of dialogue. We need to be engaged. That's why I like democracy.
But isn't that actually what the market tends to do, though? Doesn't the market tend to, whatever you want to have a red shirt, I want a blue shirt, whatever, right? And the market tends to give us what we want generally. I mean, it's not 100% rule, and obviously, if I have more money, obviously, but I'm saying, as a general rule, doesn't the market respond in that way? And like, what was the old saying? I'm going to mess up the phrase, but you're going to get it. They asked Henry Ford, how did you decide to have a car? And he said, I didn't ask the people because they would have asked for a faster horse, but I thought they should have a car. So doesn't the market kind of do what you just said, or am I off on this?
Well, here's the thing about the market. I think like you sort of said it, but it presupposes that it's equitable and that there's fair treatment. Like, the fact is that we don't get to erase 500 years of, and there's a writer, professor at Georgetown, Olufemi Taiwo, who wrote a book called Reconsidering Reparations. And one of the frameworks that he uses in it to talk about the need for reparations in the 21st century in the context of the climate crisis is that there is distributed advantage and distributed disadvantage over time. So when we're talking about the market, we can't just sort of be like, okay, well, bygones be bygones. We're here now. We're all free. And I'm going to take my 400 years of distributed advantage accumulated over time at your disadvantage. And then we're going to let the market play out, and we're going to be able to like just navigate that ourselves. I think that here's the thing that I've been thinking about today significantly, especially as I watch this country and the West in general, but especially the US, slide towards an authoritarian, white supremacist, heteropatriarchal Christo-fascism. A lot of that has to do with what I was saying earlier about the economic and social insecurities and anxieties that people develop, the masses I'm talking about, not just people in the Northeast, not just people in the big cities, not just Black people, not just brown people, but working class people across the country. Because one of my theories is that social and economic insecurity, homelessness, like dwindling pathways to economic mobility, lack of access to comprehensive healthcare, including mental health care, lack of access to like high quality education if you don't have enough money.
Wow. Okay, Jawanza, hold on. You're throwing a lot at me. I got to get a couple pieces. You're good at this. You got to give me a couple minutes to get through some of this stuff. All right. So let me go to the first piece, which was, okay, so I think you're right. I don't think there's any way of anybody denying that for hundreds of years, certain groups in the world had advantages to the market. I think that's 100% true. So does that mean you want to deconstruct the market, or does that mean you want to try to somehow give some kind of advantage to those who have been disadvantaged to more equalize the market, but keep the market? Or should the entire system be destroyed? Or what happens if, say, now because of a actually shrinking plutocracy, that now even most of the people, to your point, working class, regardless of race, gender, whatever the case may be, they're all starting to get screwed. So they're kind of all going down to zero, regardless of what my grandparents did. Now we're all starting to get screwed except for this small amount. How do you handle that? What's the right move on that one?
This is a complex question. And I'll go back to the theory I was trying to mention before.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
That the economic and social insecurity produced by market forces, which are structured by the plutocrats, and by that we just mean the billionaires, the corporations, the legacy inheritors of stolen wealth and land, all of the bad actors in our society that built it the way that it is ultimately. Because remember, this is about world making. The world that we're living in was built. It did not naturally occur. This is all constructed. Therefore, if it's not working all the way, or if it works, better for some than others, then that's up for a question. So number one, about the market, I do believe that markets are inherently problematic. I do think that we need to abolish the market. Now, one, I'm not an economist. I will not try to suggest that I know exactly how to organize money or if we even need money. But what I do know is that we need to be trying to get away from this sort of this way of winners and losers when it comes to the necessities of life. And so, and there's another part of your question that's leaving me because I don't have my notebook to take notes as you talk.
I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to catch you. Do you want to grab a notebook real fast? I don't mind. I don't want to catch you.
I got one right here. Sorry, I can't remember the other half of your question.
What I'm saying is, because right now, the plutocracy is kind of getting smaller, right? There's less and less people who have more and more of the pie. So even those people who someone might look back and go, yeah, my family was able to benefit from the past. Now even those people are being wiped out, right? I mean, and I'll look at a very specific example. I'm old enough to remember the war on drugs just basically destroying Black communities. I remember when it was destroying Black communities and nobody seemed to care. Now it's also destroying white communities just as fast. So like everybody's getting hammered now. And I think that's happening in many cases where now statistically people who would have been ahead, they're not anymore. Like everybody's getting hammered. So does that make it fair? Does that not make it fair? How do we handle that aspect?
I think it's a great illuminating moment. Like this again is about the consciousness that's being risen right now across the country. And this is, I keep trying to go here. The social and economic insecurity and anxiety that you're naming right now about what we used to be okay and now we're not okay. I think it renders people vulnerable to right-wing ideological capture. That's what we see with Donald Trump. That's what we saw on January 6, 2021. It's that there are people that are legitimately, and they should be upset with our government for choosing the billionaire class over the rest of us. And the issue is, though, the catastrophe, and I use the word catastrophe intentionally, is that, like, when I saw January 6th, for instance, and this is connected, like, I was like, yes, be upset at this plutocratic captured state. And also, you're on the wrong side. You should be over here with us, the left, but you can't be because you're white supremacists. And that's because of that sort of like that populism, populist energy, that sentiment that gets people moving. It is neither right nor left, nor not good nor bad. It is an energetic animus almost. I don't know if animus is the right word, that can be absorbed, captured, directed. And that's why I talk about organization so much, because if the story about why you're experiencing what you're experiencing is rooted in politics of fear, the stories, the frameworks, the way we talk about people. You don't have a good job because the immigrants are coming over. You don't have good education because all those Black kids are in the class. All of these kinds of ideas, which are as old as the country, don't forget, especially when we talk about the drug war. Because remember, even though we talk about the drug war launched in 1971 by Richard Nixon, it actually started, in like 1800 something. Like this is a long time coming. And guess who was
okay?
From the very beginning?
Let me go down. Wow, you went through a lot here. Let me try to go down to the January 6th part, and then I'll see if I can come back from that. January 6th, you said they should be on your side, but they can't because they're white supremacists. So my concern with that is three things. I think one, I live in New York City. Do you live in New York City also?
I live in Brooklyn, yeah.
So yeah, I live in Queens. So there's a whole lot of people who are not for Donald Trump at all, who are white as can be. I'm sure you know many of them, right? And I see it. So that part I'm a little bit shocked by. Many of the white supremacists we're seeing now, they're not white. We're seeing that happen also. I don't know if they're white supremacists or they just feel like that's the right side for them. I feel like in my time crossing the country, what I feel is there's a rural versus urban more than there is a Black versus white. It's just there's more white people in the rural areas and there's more Black people in the urban areas. But I feel like if you go into many rural areas, a lot of black people are as conservative as the white people who are their neighbors. And I think if you go into the cities, a lot of white people are as liberal as their black neighbors. That's what I feel. Am I, or maybe I'm, oh, hold on, go back. Maybe I'm misunderstanding white supremacy or white supremacists. You've said something which I thought was amazing. I want to hear this. You said that white supremacy is actually tangible. So I hope I didn't go too far. Give me what you got on this one. I'm sorry.
So when I say white supremacist, what I mean, well, one, again, it's another big umbrella term. It means a lot of things. It doesn't just mean that I am attitudinally white and think that I'm superior to everyone else and that this is a conscious decision. Most people I've encountered in my life don't identify that way. I don't think in my heart of heart that they're looking at the world that way. Does that mean, though, that white supremacist realities and the ways in which white supremacy or like sort of like exceptionalism for white people is like it is fundamentally a part of the fundamental institutions of this society? So when I say institutions, I'm talking about policing, not just a police department, but policing the practice and the police departments. It's in the laws, Fugitive Slave Act, Compromise of 1850, Black codes, slave codes. For hundreds of years, racial caste system. After Reconstruction, we had black people in Congress, and then not again for another 100 years. So like we have one black senator. It's like let's be clear that this is about this energy, but also this, because there's some people do think this way, that they are white supremacists. They do think it is to them. They do think that people like me are not actual citizens. This has been a question for hundreds of years now. But we don't talk about that today. I mean, that's another thing I want to talk about. But my point is,
but I feel like that group of people you just mentioned is a tiny group of people. I don't think there are that many people who would actually say, "Hey, Larry and Jawanza, you guys, because your skin is darker than mine, you guys aren't citizens." I think that's I mean, they exist. Don't get me wrong, of course, but I think it's a tiny part of our population, isn't it?
Yeah, a tiny and powerful part of our population. And it's very easy to be powerful after you've had hundreds of years of accumulated advantage. And also whenever the institutions, the laws of our land, the Dred Scott case, Dred versus Sanford, a Supreme Court case that said that a black people and a formerly enslaved person is not human. This is the court's precedence. So that means, and these things have been corrected to some degree with the Constitution and our amendments. And also, these do not erase the realities, because whenever you have a sustained, systematic subjugation of entire groups of people for the sole economic and social benefit of other groups of people, over time, that produces culture, and that culture is anti-Black. And anti-Black culture produces and breeds violence, and it also breeds all kinds of internal biases, etc. So like, again, I'm not an expert on race relations, but what I do know is
I'm glad to hear your opinion. So let me see if I get this right then. So when you say they're white supremacists, and again, correct me if I'm off here, you're not saying that they're Klan members who want to kill Black people. What you're saying is that they are. What I'm saying is, as a general rule, when you say that, what you're saying is they have natural biases from our culture, from their background, that even if they don't want to do that, they're still thinking that somehow, some way, that white people are better or white is better.
Or that, something like that. But again, I think it's many things, and I don't want to predict or generalize too much. But what I will say, you read George Orwell's 1984, and the main concept, like one of the main concepts in there is this concept called doublethink. Now, what you'll remember,
the concept. You mean double speak?
No, doublethink. So
doublethink. Okay, good.
So I say we do an empirical study, and this is why data doesn't matter to people. We do an empirical study, repeatable results, peer-reviewed, that says, for instance, Black children in public school are suspended twice the rate of their white counterparts for the exact same behaviors, right? I can say that to a person, and then they will hear that information, the irrefutable empirical evidence, as material as the table I'm standing before. And then they will still say, well, they should have been, acting up in class. I'm like, well, okay. Do you see what I mean? So like, it's that kind of thing. It's this.
So that's kind of how you define. That's how you define white supremacy. That type of thing.
It's that type of thing. It's the virulent burning crosses and all that. It's the driving your U-Haul into the White House gates and having a fucking Nazi flag for some reason. It's about like voting for people for public office who run sustained narrative-based campaigns and legislative campaigns that depend on dehumanizing concepts and ideas. Like, for instance, the fact that 70 plus million people voted again for Donald Trump for president after those 4 abysmal years, the way in which he talked about people in the very first week that he launched his campaign, about Mexicans, talking about shithole countries later on, talking about grabbing people by their like private parts, and just and no care whatsoever, and to think that is an appropriate or okay way to be, or I think is rooted in anti-Black ideas, anti-Semitic ideas, xenophobic ideas, in American exceptionalist, which is white American exceptionalism. It's this nationalism piece, because something happens with the patriotism in the United States. I can't speak about the rest of the world, but I can say about here as a person that's born and raised in the United States, that the way in which we talk, not we, but a lot of people in the country talk about the country and about how this is our place, our home, etc., is in this very exclusionary kind of way. And I think one of the reasons why we have so many instances of legitimate corporeal violence, mass shootings, etc., vigilantism, like we saw on the train, people being assaulted in public, all these kinds of things, is because we are not sharing an origin story, number one. Because if you you can tell some people like,
okay, hold on. That before you get on that road, I like that road, but before I do a little bit of admin. Might make you angry. I got to do some capitalism. I apologize, a little bit, right? If you guys would help me out, do me a favor. I need to get past Mr. Go Rhythm, Algorithm. I got to get past him. So click that like button. It does matter. Every time you click, now all of a sudden I'm getting past the algorithms. Please do that if you would. It does help. Also, if you're on Twitter and you're watching this on Twitter, please retweet this right now so other people can see it, right? It's important if you can do it. Elon doesn't like it, so it's fine. You'll make Elon, or if you like, maybe he'll like it. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, tweet it either way. Also, if you happen to be on YouTube, you can also super chat me if you like. But more importantly, Jawanza has shown us some love. He's out here trying to show us some love, so show him some love. Heading over to Twitter, follow him on Twitter. All this information is in the description, but follow him on Twitter at Jawanza. If you're listening to this on the podcast, JAWANZA. Or follow his website, JawanzaJamesWilliams.com. So now I want to go back to what you were talking about, if I could. You were talking about the idea of voting for this bad guy. Doesn't our system kind of make it to where it's the lesser of two evils? I mean, yeah. I'm old enough to remember, Joe Biden helping out to put 100,000 cops into my neighborhood, right? I mean, I'm remember him hanging out with the Klan guy, right? So I mean, it's not like either one of them was that great, right? So aren't we kind of in a situation to where, okay, which one do I think is least bad?
Yeah, and I think that's the logical and reasonable thing to do. If there are two enemies and you have to choose one, I'm going to choose the one with the knife, not the one with the AR-15. Number one. So I don't think that it's insane to make a choice in a situation. Now, do I understand disengagement of the electoral system because of it? I understand that, sure. And also that does not mean that you're not going to be subject to being governed by whoever is elected. So, that's, and then I guess my other question would be, well, what else are you doing? So I think that electoralism is a pathway in our tool belt of tools that we need to build a thriving, active, and capable civic polity with our own means of challenging state power. And so, like, for instance, when people say things like general strike, I get excited. I'm like, oh, they're talking about general strikes. That's good. It's exciting. And also, a general strike needs to have a clear demands. And clear demands are able to be generated when you have association. So not that we need one gigantic organization, but we need many organizations. We need many coalitions, and we need to be able to come to some shared perspective about where we're headed. And so the other thing I'll say that's really, really important about the lesser of two evils piece is that the difference it tends to be, from my perspective, with the establishment Democrats. So I don't mean every Democrat in the whole country. I mean the establishment powerful Democrats and the establishment powerful Republicans, and increasingly this incredibly violent right-wing sect of an already problematic political party, is that the Democrats, the neoliberal Democrats, they tend, who are just, and by neoliberal, I just mean, what I mean by that is that they may have some concern about some of the economic and social issues that we're experiencing and want to do a little bit here and there, like food stamps, maybe a housing voucher, to sort of, alleviate some degree of suffering so that they can retain power, but they're not going to challenge the fundamental structures that led to the housing insecurity and home and hunger in the first place, right? These parties can't do that for us at this stage. But so that at least slows down that vulnerability that I named before about people being sort of subject to right-wing or sort of hyper-conservative ideological experiences. Because if I'm hungry, I'm a lot more angry. And when I'm angry, I'm a lot more susceptible to trying to channel that anger. And if the right parties find me, and articulate a story or a framework that's not helpful, or that, so that's what happens. That's why I think a lot of young people end up in these neo-Nazi organizations, et cetera.
And this is the reason why I like the concept of building an organization, because again, I feel part of the reason why I believe there is a lot of political apathy. I know you're not sure that you believe that, but I do. I think it's a real problem. I think because you have people who will go out and protest, but not know why they're protesting, and then not have an answer, or protest a way that's completely ineffective, and then maybe not even vote at the end of the day after the whole thing's done. And the example I think was biggest for me was Occupy Wall Street. I remember Occupy Wall Street. I was going down there to support local businesses. I was working in Midtown, but I would come down and support local businesses to try to keep this thing going. And I thought the concept of it, in my view, was a great concept. It was, look, the 99% are screwing the 1%. Let's make some changes. This is bad. I'm in. I like this idea. I'm in. But to your point, there was no real demand. There was no real it was just like, I'm pissed off. And eventually there was a bunch of paint jobs, right? They did some nice painting over stuff, so something looked better, but there was no fundamental change. It was just a paint job. And that is my worry. And I think that's why people are more apathetic, because that constantly happens.
Well, I think I have a different analysis about Occupy Wall Street than that.
Tell me.
Number one, I think that a fundamental transformation is that we say that 99% versus 1%. That's significant transformation about our consciousness about class for people that are not engaged in class-based, specifically political conversations. Number one. Number two, I think that direct actions like Occupy Wall Street are a reflection of social movements. I don't mean that we need organizations to control the ways in which people decide to take political action. It's a way to equip people to know the best ways for them to take political action. But the thing is, and this is where Kwame Ture says that, or used to say, that really impacts the way that I think about work. He says, essentially, I'm paraphrasing now, is that mobilization is temporary, organization is eternal. Because people, as you said, will show up for a protest. They will go and rally whenever they learn of some injustice. And I would argue that that's a really good sign. Because can you imagine if horrific things happen in our city, our state, our country, and no one says a word? That's the day when we know something has gone significantly wrong. So the fact, even if people are sort of like flailing in the political winds and calling for some ambiguous justice, it is better than silence. It is up to those of us who understand the utility of organization, the need for power building, for political education, for the development of relationships intra-community and inter-community. It's up to us to offer those vehicles to people to offer political homes beyond the dominant capitalist political parties. And so we got to always be willing and able to sort of do that. And I also think that the sort of general populace that takes direct action, for instance, becomes critical of organizations. And I think that critique itself is good. Like, we got to be willing to be critiqued, and we got to be willing to critique, because critique means consciousness. Now, talking shit without any meaningful contribution, or without having some semblance of actually understanding what it is you're critiquing, is a problem. But
Yes.
Again, this country has become increasingly, and I think because of the right wing, not the left, increasingly anti-intellectual. We don't have intellectual conversations happening in like sort of mainstream spaces. I mean, can you name for me right now? Every Sunday, every night, I'm trying to find things just on cable that other people, like, I don't want to just go on YouTube only. I want to see what the most people are watching. And if they're watching CNN, MSNBC, and God forbid, Fox News, I mean, what are you really getting? Not to say that there aren't any personalities or any people that show up on these spaces that offer, critical, loving.
No, I think you are completely correct. I think if you look at the mainstream media, you get nothing but garbage. I agree completely. I think the only place you find anything like this is on the internet right now. I think it's true. But here's what I think is the good news. I think the internet is becoming much stronger than any cable news. I mean, the cable news now networks, they get maybe 500,000 viewers a night. I mean, I know a lot of podcasts who get more than that every single day. So I do think it is getting better. Let me grab a couple of comments if I could.
Why do you do that? The democratization of platform is inherently, I think, a good thing. And also,
agreed,
we can also see how that also creates new kinds of conundrums, new kinds of Pandora boxes that have been opened, where we have vulnerable people, like I named before, finding out or seeking and then being flooded via right-wing algorithms for the sole purpose of profits for these big tech corporations like YouTube. And then those kids become radicalized in such a way that they begin to, their framework of reality is distorted. And then they start to hate Black people. They start to hate queer people. They think that all the problems in their lives are caused by immigrants seeking refuge in this country. They think that somehow this country existed for all time immemorial, and that somehow it belongs to them, that human beings can own anything about the earth.
Let me grab a couple comments, and then I'm going to touch those too. Dave says, it's tough. You have to create a strong local organization to be able to inform local community. And yes, and this is my point earlier, I think it's harder to get people to come out and want to organize. They want to mobilize because, I think you're right, Jawanza, when something bad happens, then I don't mind getting out of my, I'll stop watching Netflix, right? I'll stop playing Fortnite and I'll go outside. But now I'm not doing that. Now I gotta organize that. I gotta show up like every Thursday or the second Tuesday of the month. I'm like, yeah, but no one got killed on a subway, so maybe I'm not going to show up this week. I think Dave's at a point. How do we get past that? How do we get it to where now you got to show up when it's not a big news thing, where I don't see it, across Twitter or Facebook?
Yeah, that's a political education piece. And it's about that's a question about organizers and about organizations and what those organizations are doing. Number one, any organizer that has ever really fundamentally worked in a power building, community-based political organizations that are progressive, I can't speak to the right-wing organizations, I don't know what they do, but it's always about self-interest. Like the leading issues to get people involved, to capture them into organization, has to be about their immediate experiences, the vast majority of us. And then it's the work that's a bridge, that's an opportunity, it's a portal for you to help people come to this consciousness so that they understand themselves. Even if I'm not experiencing homelessness, I begin to understand the fundamental structures and practices and I'm able to locate this moment throughout history and all of these powers that are at play, and I want to do something about it. And now I know what to do about it, because the crisis is, again, it's a crisis of imagination, lack of political homes, and what do you even do? Like the people that go into the street and protest and say hey, we want justice for Jordan Neely, for instance. Is justice just having this person arrested who strangled him to death? I don't think so. And
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's what bothered me, right? The protesting, in my view, and I'm not trying to take away Neely's death at all. But what I'm trying to say is the protests were for the wrong reason, the wrong place. The protests were in the subways. No rich people in the subways. They got their black cars in the street, right? So you slowed down the working class. And the protest was to put a guy in jail, not to change the system, right? That should have, none of that should have happened, but it did because the system was so bad, right? As bad as it is for Neely and bad for Penny too, right? All of them, none of that should have happened. And that's, I think, one of my points. They protested for the wrong reason, the wrong place. They should have been on Park Avenue protesting for a change in the MTA policy or something.
Well, there were many protests. Number one, like for instance, one that we organized at City Hall Park, the site of supposed democracy in New York City, because this is about a structural, fundamental economic and socio-political issue. So I think that it's a good sign that people mobilize to the site of violence, because that, for whatever reason, is the extent of perhaps of their political imagination when it comes to like, what is the thing that needs to happen? And remember, people are so vulnerable right now and upset about these kinds of brazen, obviously racialized, racist occurrences. It's so black and white, so to speak, like pun intended there, that it's like sort of shocks people in a certain kind of way where it's harder to get there all the way whenever it's like, let's march on Park Avenue, Billionaire Row, because these are the people that are literally siphoning all of the resources from all of the people that are creating the kinds of conditions that render people vulnerable to where you can end up on a subway and strangled to death because you're having a mental health experience, allegedly. I don't know if that's what actually happened. But my point ultimately is, like, I don't think that protest for incarceration it's against my theory of change. Now, should this person be held accountable? Absolutely. Jordan Neely's family wanted that. And for so many people, their definition of justice is the carceral definition. And that carceral definition isn't coming organically from the grassroots. It's not coming from our spirit. It's coming from the state, the dominant.
All right, hold on. I so want to go down this road because I want to talk to abolitionists so badly. Let me grab a couple more comments so that the people stay here because they're commenting. I'm going to give them a couple a little bit. Sam says, I know many AOC and Bernie supporters who felt betrayed at the joining of the warmongering left, right, and center. Many feel there's a hidden hand that corrupts once people reach DC. I think that's true. I think Sam's exactly on the money. It feels almost like people go there thinking they're going to do right. And look, I don't know AOC personally. I don't know her. But I felt like she had good intentions. I mean, I believe that. I could be wrong. Maybe she's an evil person. I don't know that. I don't know her. But from my image of her, I think she was trying to do the right thing. But I feel like now she's become a sellout. I feel like she's more worried about, doing makeup videos on TikTok than trying to help anybody in the city. I mean, I think a lot of people would agree with me. Where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I'm not as critical of AOC as I see a lot of folks become. Number one, I think that it's already a lot to be a woman in Congress. One. Number two, it's a lot to be a brown woman in Congress. Three, it's a difficult job to be a brown woman in Congress who's a leftist and who's associated to democratic socialism and to DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. And I think that the fact is that Congress itself as an institution, because of the domination of the capitalist class in the configuration of the party, who has power, who's able to get things done, there's probably all kinds of things going on that's preventing her from being able to try to do exactly the kinds of things she wants to do. But again, I'm not following so closely the day-to-day actions and interactions of AOC because I'm clear.
I gotta tell you, I feel like you're giving her excuses. I think like you're being soft on her.
I'm not being soft on her.
That's how I feel.
I think that my theory of change is not that we need Congress. We need Congress to do stuff. Don't get me wrong. And Congress is one of the institutions that I think would be last on my abolish list. Like, I like this configuration of government at this stage, for my understanding today. But what I will say is that one, we need bigger, way bigger social movements in the United States, because it would be a whole different thing if there were 10,000 of us outside of the congressional chambers calling for Medicare for all, sort of like we saw on January 6th, if there were leftist people. Not that we should do that, what they did. And also, like, I'm not going to knock anybody's tactics. If those tactics are rooted in love, care, and compassion and injustice, and sometimes it looks like rage, like, now, should you be trying to strangle people and lynch people? Absolutely not. So I can't say that AOC is a traitor to conscientious people. I can say that I never expected perfection. And I can say that I would not leave all of my chips in the basket of Congress, no matter, even if I go to like public office ever, which I seriously doubt. I'm certain there will be something I will do.
Okay. Well, no. If you become a city councilman, I'm going to call you a sellout. If you become like AOC, I'm going to come get you.
I think that you're going to be becoming a sellout if you go into the state. Like, you can't win. You can't win.
I got 4 different people talking about your ideas. 3 different people talking about your ideas of working class. I'm going to bring up all 3 of those. Missy says, I can get behind the working class terminology. Then again, I'm the working poor class. So I think she's kind of with you on the idea of broadening it, right? That more people are there. And Patty says, what is one of the first questions you ask them when you meet them? What do you do for a living? What's your job? We judge someone's value on what they do. This is another point, right? So now we judge your class. Oh, you do the thing that I think is cooler than the other thing. And I think one of the points she's bringing up now is, if this is cultural also, right? I lived in Japan for many years. And being a teacher in Japan is a very high class job, even though you're not paid as much as other jobs. So a teacher has a higher status, if that makes any sense. Well, it did, at least when I was there. I was there many years ago. It did. But I think in America, it's much more about how much money do you make, right? Oh, you make more money, therefore you're higher class. So I think she's kind of in that regard with you. Peter's not, though. Peter says the term working class is silly. It's self-serving in one use's context and derogatory in another. In 40 years of treading on the earth, I have personally never met a member of the non-working class that I'm aware of. So I gave you a lot there. Do you want to give me 3 different ones? Do you want to touch any of those?
Yeah, all of them. I agree with the first comment about poor, like a working class poor. Like, I struggle with even saying the phrase like the poor and working class. I want to say working class people, because it's not just the fact that you have a job, because you can be a disabled person who does not have work and you're still working class. Because this is again, it's about our sort of like, unfortunately, fixed status in the sort of like constellation of wealth and distribution of resources in the society. Like, some of us are kind of locked. And I think that the big lie that we really should be talking about, that song, I want to be a billionaire so fucking bad. It's not going to happen. Like, why are we singing about that? We shouldn't want to be billionaires. We should be wanting to be free, secure, and able to exercise our human rights and the democratic rights that we grant each other via our shared collective government. And number 2, I 100% agree. When we meet people, we ask, like, I agree with that whole assessment. And the thing that I think that I often say about that exact thing is that what I think we need in this country, because I think we need so much more complex civic engagement via organization, that it should be commonplace to say, like, hey, what's your name? Where are you from? Oh, what do you do for work? Oh, and what organizations are you a part of? Are you funding? Because remember, we are at the precipice of climate catastrophe, of annihilation, and it is all preventable. And I haven't even mentioned the specter of nuclear conflict, of continued wars into the perpetual future until we're all gone. And the only way that we're going to be able to change all of those things, I fundamentally believe, is that if we all become anti-capitalist. Do we all got to think exactly the same thing? Do we all got to have exactly the same theory of change? No. But I do think that if there is a fundamental issue with not just the practices, the products, the technologies of capitalism, and now I'm talking about the market, about how we construct the economy and therefore the society. These things are not separate. They are all intimately connected. Because I can remember a time, that I would have been a product on the market as a human being. So my point is, we got to get away from that thinking, because it requires us to think ways about other human beings and other life on the planet.
So let's go to the other comment where
It's
he says that he thinks we're all working class. I mean, I think that it is hard, though. I think you want to be broad, but at one point you've got to draw a line. It does become hard drawing a line, right? Because I think about it like we talk about, like I know here in New York City, I know bankers, you probably know some too, where, day to day, they are working hard and they do have a salary day to day. But then bonus time comes around in like February, March, April, and they're getting a 7-figure check. So is that working class? Is that not working class, right? Where do you draw that line?
I mean, I think when it comes to people with, increased wealth, who do work day to day to get a paycheck, I would say this is when it really becomes important for what are the ways in which they are using their resources. What are they supporting? What are they not supporting? What kinds of political issue-based campaigns they support? What kinds of candidates they support? What kinds of society are they trying to craft? Are they trying to raise all boats? Are they trying to bring all people up if they're going to be up there with this capitalist system? Or are they critical of that system? So like you could be a billionaire and be anti-capitalist, but I don't know how you stay a billionaire. Like you have to become a billionaire 100 times, because if you're anti-capitalist, then you need to give all that money away, and you shouldn't have gotten it in the first place. But again, I don't know. Like maybe these are the new frameworks, the new ideas that we need to develop, new ways of describing ourselves, new ways of describing who is in the tent of people that need to be a part of the revolutionary movements that we need to transform not just ourselves, but the world around us. And I think that's the work. And I think that means we have to build relationships. And again, all of this is impossible to do if we are subject to the ways in which capitalist cultures force us to be more private. It forces that, like, I don't want to tell you how much money I make. It's because competition's a thing. So
I gotta grab a couple pieces in that too. All right. I still want to go to Abolitionist. I still want to go to the capitalist piece. Let me grab one more pushback from Isaac. Isaac says, and I think it's a valid question, to address a supremacy argument. In California, where they want reparations, and were never even a slave state, they have been grants for education for literally every other race except for white males who don't qualify for any grants. I'm assuming that's true. I don't know that to be true. I'm going to assume that Isaac's telling the truth. I'm not sure that's true. And now they're getting screwed again for something they weren't even involved in. How is that not going to create more backlash? And I think that isn't a question that I think is a valid one. Do we care about backlash? Is there a way of not having backlash? Is that inevitable, right? Isn't whenever you try to right a wrong, particularly if there's time involved between the wrong and the righting of it, you're going to have people who say, hey, it wasn't me. Why? It wasn't me. Why? Yeah. Is there an issue with backlash?
So really, I've been thinking about backlash actually a lot over the last couple of years. But one, I don't think that whenever we see these resurgence of right-wing anger, white supremacist violence, those kinds of things, I don't think it's backlash. I think it's just a sort of resurfacing of the realities of these racist classist states. Number one. Number two, I don't know if I even like state-based reparation programs. I can't speak about the California reparations piece, and I don't even know that much about it.
I don't know it either. That's why I didn't want to say anything. I don't know that one.
But reparations is I know this person doesn't understand reparations. I can already tell from how they're talking. So it is what it is. But like reparations is about restoring to good measure. It's about sort of dealing with the ways in which the state, and it's not just about enslavement, it's also about another 150 years of racial caste systems. So keep that in mind. And also continued issues that we're experiencing still to this day. But it's also, and here's one of the biggest problems in the US as a society politically, and why we're in the situation that we're in, is because we haven't had reparations, truth, and reconciliation for the enslavement of African people and the genocide of indigenous people and displacements. Like, we need to have a society-wide conversation. Every fundamental institution needs to be engaged in this conversation like it's a big picture thing. In 2020, maybe March, noted radical Black queer feminist Barbara Smith wrote an article in The Nation called How to Dismantle White Supremacy. And she sort of talks about how it would have to be a project at the scale of the Marshall Plan to really begin for us to excavate white supremacist public policy out of our
hold on now. I get what you're saying now. This is a big deal now. So if I get what you're saying that actually a state level plan might actually have more backlash than if we actually had one massive plan that everyone was kind of getting on board with. So you think this should be like an amendment to the Constitution or something that big? Yeah. You think that would have less backlash?
Yeah, I'm talking about big. I'm talking about like 10, 15 times bigger than the hearings they had about January 6th. I'm talking about sustained for years. It's a conversation that we have to have as a society.
I'm actually thinking that I think you might be right on that one. At first I was kind of pushing back in my head, but now I'm saying I think you're right. If it was a bigger thing and everyone was talking about it, I think we'd have less. I think we're still going to have backlash if that happens, but I think we'd have less. I think you're right. I think the local one's actually worse.
Because it's also a question. Because remember, it's so much. The crazy thing here is, and I'm trying to become an academic. That's what I'm doing now. And I'm telling you, so much of it is not about like everybody's not going to become a fucking historian. I accept that. And also how we understand ourselves, how we locate ourselves is by the stories we tell. And one of the big issues that we have in the country is that we don't have a shared reality. We don't have a shared origin story. And I was going there earlier, like we don't know really why.
Hold on, but you're kind of don't we want? I'm not huge on nationalism, but isn't that like, if we're America at least, isn't that a great way of creating a common story, right? A common history of America that would bring us together. Isn't that a great way of doing it? Yeah, I feel like you don't like that idea though.
No, so I don't think that we have to be Americans as opposed to something else. And I do think though that we are here in this country. This is the fact. Here we are. So like I understand that. Like I'm not trying to say that everybody should just pack bags and go back to some DNA lineage where you may have come from. That's not going to work. It's not going to work for me, and probably won't work for most people here. But a lot of people it will. But my point is, we need to have some stewardship rights to land for indigenous people. That needs to be a bigger conversation. We need, I think, I'm losing my thoughts. My friend texted me, but I think that if we have the shared conversation, revisiting what actually happened, because a lot of the things that I'm holding in my mind right now, most people don't know about. And so like, I understand, like, if you don't know what the fugitive slave laws are, if you don't know what the Black codes are, what the slave codes are, if you don't understand some of these Supreme Court cases and what they meant, and like, then you're not going to be able to really understand why people are saying that the legacies of slavery are still thriving in the 21st century. They think that we're just
so wait a minute, hold on. So you're coming up and actually telling me something where you're saying if we had a larger Marshall Plan that actually talked about the history of America, that could actually bring people together. That could be our similar story that could bring people together.
Because it would, like, I think it would help. Because whenever you say things like for instance, affirmative action, or these sort of hot button issues that are rendered political issues by people on the right who have an agenda to destroy all kinds of pathways for economic mobility, etc. Like if we do that and people understand why, and they are given the opportunity over and over and over again, because they're not going to go out and Google it all by themselves, because they're going to go Google this other distorted perspectives. We need to, like, not that we have that I know the perspective. I think that there needs to be some critical engagement, but they don't want us to even do critical anything theory no more. So we got to figure out these kinds of pieces, especially as they ban books, anything that really tries to illuminate a fuller story, like the 1619 Project, the collection of essays about the origin of the United States from the perspective of Black Americans. Like, this is an incredibly important document. And which I have right here, this book here. And so we need to be able to look at our country, look at our story and move it around, look through different perspectives. Like the thing that I'm always training folks with, and this is why I mentioned political education, is about how do you help people develop a critical analysis, a critical lens by which to see the world. Because once you know how to see the world with different lenses, then you know how to apply them and whenever they're not there. So for instance, if you have glasses and the lenses are red, when you look out into the world, what color is the world?
That's right, sure. Yep.
Right. You put on blue, what color is the world?
It's blue, sure.
You put on red and blue, what color is the world?
It's purple.
Purple. Right? So the same is true with identities. The same is true with class. The same is true with gender. So if you're able to apply all these lenses, then you're better able to understand what is happening and also your behaviors, therefore to augment those behaviors. And this is a concept that I really
I want to grab two pieces if I can. Before I do that, I do one more time to let people know. Guys, if you're enjoying this conversation, I hope you are, then do me a favor, click that like button. It does matter. Every time I keep bugging you, I'm bugging you because it matters. It's how we get around the algorithms. Please do that if you can. Also, if you're watching on Twitter, please retweet this. It's a great conversation. Please retweet. I'm taking your comments to the best of my ability, please. If you want to super chat me, you can. If you're on YouTube, Larry Sharp, super chat me if you want to, 100%. If you want to support this show so I can stop being a working class and be a capitalist so then Jawanza won't like me no more, you can go over to patreon.com/sharpway and throw me $10 a month and I can become a capitalist and Jawanza won't come on my show no more. So we can do that. Absolutely. So, all right. So I do want to, though, I want to bring up two other parts if I could before we go too far down this road. One that I really want to talk about because this is a personal thing for me. I hate the prison system. I can't stand the system that we have at all. I hate the war on drugs. I hate all that stuff. And I've seen it from both sides. My father was a corrections officer at Rikers Island, and my mother was an addict and a convicted felon. So I've seen it from both sides, and I still can't stand it. You've said things that I love, like, the prohibition is dehumanizing, which I completely agree. But you go to a level of abolitionist. I struggle with that. I'm just being forward with you. I struggle understanding the idea of abolishing prisons and abolishing the system. I'm all about reforming the system. Like, I'm going to sign up on almost anything to reform it, right? Abolishment's difficult. Help walk me through the abolishing.
Yeah, sure. Because it can appear to be a very jarring thing to hear whenever you've seen violence, when you've experienced violence, when you've heard the stories of violence. Whenever, like, I think what we have to get out of our heads, again, this is a crisis of imagination and understanding of the fundamental sociological origins of violence. Like, what are the conditions that lead people to do the kinds of things that lead them to prison? And also the assumption that all sort of people in prison, or reasons that people are in prison, are legitimate reasons for them to be in prison. Remember, criminality is a legal framework. These are not 100%. Natural phenomena. We've decided what's criminal and what's not criminal. Didn't I just mention the fugitive slave laws? If you were an enslaved person and you escaped, you could be captured and returned to captivity or imprisoned, right?
I'm not fighting you with any of this. I'm on board with everything you're saying. I'm on board.
So abolition, if someone fully understands a framework, not that there's one framework, of an abolitionist perspective, is if they can tell you that abolition is more about building than it is abolishing.
Okay.
Hear me. Abolitionists are as concerned, if not more so concerned, about safety than those who advocate for the carceral systems that have been disproportionately violent to Black people, brown people, poor people, etc. Right? This is a fact. These are it's crystal clear. We are the most incarcerated nation in the world, and a big vehicle of that has been the drug war. And so my point is, abolitionists understand that we need, first of all, most people that are inside of prisons are not in prisons because they have done some violent thing. Correct. Or are a danger to people. It normally has to do with like different kinds of, I would call them infractions or things like that, or maybe
it's like you're in jail because you were late for your parole meeting. I mean, that's a common problem, right? You were 2 hours late for your parole meeting and now you're back in jail. Or you got caught in a sweep. They arrested 17 people. You need to get back to work, so you did a plea bargain, not realizing you're gonna do 3 years. All the time.
So number one, understanding that if our goal, so like, if you know how they call prisons correctional facilities, right? Well, they probably call it that because it's supposed to be about augmenting behavior, but it actually doesn't do that. And it's a site of disappearing people. It's a site of revenue generation. It's a site of social control, because again, it's about the stories that we tell, and the people in power have vested interest. Most people in power have a vested interest in the maintenance of that kind of system. So one, we got to sort of dispel what's mythology and deal with what's real. And I think that we also got to get away from the ideologies of punishment, of retribution, of revenge, that justice means an eye for an eye. That is not a sustainable way for us to think as we advance into the future. If we want to remain, a cohesive, functioning society, especially if you want a multiracial, pluralistic, democratic project in the United States. So there's that. Number three, like I would say, it's also about understanding the socioeconomic conditions that lead to different behaviors, as I said before. So what are the things that you're demanding of your state?
Yeah, but hold on. I guess we'll go this. If I'm with you on all of that. So if we were able to begin to repair that, right, which would take time. It took centuries to put it here. It's going to take at least years, if not decades, to get it to someplace even close to fair. Let's say we do that. We work towards that, and we start making the changes. It becomes fairer by the year. We can measure it. We're doing the right stuff. Does that mean we get rid of? There's still gonna be bad people who do bad things, right? That group of people obviously is gonna shrink, clearly, but there's still gonna be people who do bad things. What do we do with them?
And then we use our vast resources that we've saved to employ new modes of mitigation, new modes of taking care of people. So like, if we didn't have 2 million people inside of our prisons, which I can't even imagine how much that costs, and we only had 1,000 people in prisons across the country, how much resources would we have to deal with not just like keeping those people away from other people? It's about, let's lean in and like, what's really going on here? So I think that like at the core of it, and here's another difference that we don't say out loud, is that I don't believe that people are monsters. I believe that people can do monstrous things. And here's how it connects back to white supremacy and to anti-Black cultures. If you believe that there are some people that are just inherently bad, then you are misunderstanding. You're misunderstanding something. Or you don't believe in, like, I'm as human as you are, and we are as human as humans were 100,000 years ago. We're the same species. And so the idea, now we're not all the same. Some of us have different complexities going on, but that's why I use like complexity as a term. Like when we talk about mental health, I don't say mental health or mental illness. Number one, the reason why I don't do that is because one, everybody's decided to deputize themselves as psychiatrists. I don't know when that happened. So just stop. Like, you're not cops and you're not psychiatrists. Just stop. One. Number two, though, is that saying mental illness presupposes that there's something individually, neurologically or biologically, psychologically wrong with a person that has something to do with them as an individual. That's that individualism thinking coming into the fray again. But actually, it could be that because of my sustained experience of, intimate partner violence, because of my sustained experience of street homelessness, because of my sustained experience of hunger, and, sort of political, social abandonment, maybe I develop a mental illness. And then that mental illness is exacerbated by my social and economic situation. So what's really wrong with me is not my mental illness. It's the mental health complexity that counts all of the things that led to that moment. So when we're thinking about prisons, which have been rendered, to be clear, our biggest shelters, our biggest healthcare providers, our biggest places for people to get the things that they need, that's a huge problem. Number one.
So it's our mental health facility, the biggest mental health facility too.
Just throw people away. And Angela Davis, again, I'll bring her back into the conversation. She talks a lot about civic death, with prisons. It's like suddenly, once you're in a prison, you can't build relationships. Not in the same way as you can when you're out and free, so to speak.
Yep.
Like you can't engage in political organization. There's how many organizations across the country that organize inside of prisons? I'm sure there are several, but like we need people to be free to organize.
Okay, so now I think I'm getting what you're talking about abolitionism. What you're actually talking about. You're not just talking about tomorrow tearing all the prisons down. That's not what you're talking about. What you're talking about is building up the infrastructure outside of the prison while reforming the prison to the point where you don't need any prisons. Did I get that right? Is that's the way to go?
That's mostly it. I think that I would have to say, as Ruth Wilson Gilmore would say, another writer, scholar that people should know. She's a geographer, and she has a book called Abolition Geography, or it's a collection of essays. And basically, she talks about all of these dimensions of what abolitionism is. Angela Davis talks about abolition democracy, because how can you really have a democracy if people are not free? So like these are the questions that we should be asking ourselves. But the number one thing I think we have to say too is that no prison or jail is humane. And that's hard for us to accept, but they are not humane spaces. Caging human beings is not a humane practice. And I believe that we are so sophisticated of a species at this late stage in our development, or early stage, we should say. We can go to space. Elon can talk about going to Mars, but we can't figure out other ways to mitigate problematic behavior, to eliminate the conditions that exacerbate problematic behavior. So I think that it's a question about capital. It's a question about patriarchy, about how we understand gender and roles. It's a question about race and ethnicity. It's a question about religion. It's like, how do we understand each other? Who's safe and who's unsafe? Whose behavior is acceptable and whose behavior is scary? Because remember, what behavior we engage in is also closely connected to our cultural configurations. Like
I get all of that. I'm with you.
Is fine for some of us. For some of us, we don't like it.
I want to move, if I could, to something that you were talking about, patriarchy and things of that sort, and two parts, I guess, they kind of go together. You have linked homophobia and anti-Black racism to capitalism. That feels not right to me, because I can think of many other types of governments, theories, ways of people living where there's been tons of homophobia and tons of anti-Black racism. Why do you link it? Why do you link those two?
Well, one, I don't think that there's only one link to homophobia, transphobia, anti-Blackness. And I do think there's a direct correlation between capitalism and anti-Black racism, etc. And I've sort of already said it, but essentially, at the very, very basic sort of ideological necessity for a capitalist framework of understanding the world and how we should organize our economy and our society means that there has to be winners and losers. That means that there has to be bosses and workers. It means that there has to be someone who makes a bigger check and someone who gets a smaller check. And too long, for hundreds of years now, it's always been the people that are the furthest removed from the dominant center identity, which is white, male, straight. And so what I'm saying is, if that's working for you, and if you have to continue to craft narratives, perspectives that justify the inequitable distribution of resources, especially whenever you're considering that the workers are the ones, like if you're a capitalist and you design a chair, and I'm a worker and I build the chair, the materials coming from the earth doesn't belong to either of us or to both of us, but your design, patented, you don't do anything. I'm building all the chairs, but you get most of the resources. So it's about this intellectual thing. And don't forget,
I get that part, but my point is, I do get that part. I'm not saying that's how capitalism works. I'm with you, but if you put capitalism into Africa, which we have in many cases, now you got Black people who are, it's not anti-Black racism. Now it's a class structure, maybe a tribal structure or whatever in their own, depending upon what country they are in and how their tribal system works. It's that. If it's in Asia, maybe it's non-Han Chinese being punished versus Han Chinese. Yeah, so and homophobia is everywhere. I'm struggling to find that one.
So first of all, sort of like racism morphs in different contexts, just like with any other social movement, orientation of how to organize a society, you can't try to apply what worked in Soviet Russia to the United States, even as a leftist, socialist, communist. Like, we're living in a different historicism. There's different factors. We're a homogenous society. So my point is, it's going to look different, but there's some trends that remain true. So like you sort of already started saying it. It's like, okay, now we're all Black people, and some of us are capitalists and some of us are not, or most of us are not, some of us are. And then there's this distribution of resources and opportunities based on different ethnic backgrounds, so different religious backgrounds. So those kinds of things arise. And I will also say that I don't think of capitalism devoid of racial frameworks. I operate from a racial capitalism perspective. So when I say capitalism, I'm talking about racialized capitalism. And because that's the most successful capitalist enterprise in the world is that of the United States. And so much, including the drug war, of our practices, ideas from this country have been exported around the world, and it facilitates these kinds of problematic ideas. When you talk about like homophobia in many countries around the world, a lot of that has to do with Americans going out into the world, especially missionaries, and spreading these kinds of ideas. Why are they doing that? I don't know. How are they able to do that? Resources. So I don't know. Like the point I'm trying to make is it's easier to justify an unfair system if there are people who can be scapegoated for having deserved the position in society economically that they occupy. Like, that is just like,
okay. All right. I'm struggling to make that connection, but okay. I get where you're going with it. There's another piece though that I think we see in America now, the idea of a patriarchy. I feel like the patriarchy is falling. And I say that because if you look now at trends, if you're say under 30 or so, I really feel like women are winning at everything. I mean, they're beating men at everything. And any way you could think, they're winning. And aren't we going to then see, I'm assuming, and maybe I'm wrong here, 30 years from now, when the women who are now 30 are now 60, aren't they going to be running everything? Aren't they going to be their own cabal of, plutocrats? Aren't the plutocrats going to be more percentage women than men, but we're still going to have a plutocracy, but now there'll be more women than men in it versus now more men than women?
I mean, I have to stop you there, like, immediately, in the fact that just last year, 50-year precedent was overturned in the Supreme Court, Roe v. Wade. So, like, women's rights are being reversed. The the Women's Protection Act on the federal level has never been passed, been introduced since the 1970s. So they can't even get a fucking congressional bill, passed to say that women are equal to men in the United States. And when we say it in that way, we're really talking about white men and white women. And so number one, that. Number two, women's successes that they have been able to generate comes directly from their organizing, from their social movement building, from their feminist, especially Black feminist organizing infrastructure, and also being the ones really supporting so many social movements invisibly. So number one, I don't think the patriarchy is falling. I think that culturally, more men, more masculine people, more cisgendered men are aware of these problematic dynamics because of all of the popular education that we've received, and also through watching people be held accountable for how they treat women and feminine people. So there's that. But no doubt in my mind that the patriarchy is falling. No doubt in my mind that women, feminine people that are perceived as women, people that identify as women, trans women, they are under attack constantly. Politically, socially, through our media, through our movies, all of these things. So to me,
I got to tell you, I'm hard pressed to agree that, and again, the patriarchy still exists now. What I'm saying is 30 years from now. It's hard for me to see what you're saying to play out. I mean, there are over 7 million American men who are now NEET, right? Not employed, educated, or in training. 7 million. Those guys are just failing. They're not getting married. They're not fun. They don't have friends. I mean, they're failing miserably. in 30 years from now, they're not going to be able to pick up the pieces 30 years from now. And not only that, I don't see yes, Roe v. Wade was overturned, but in every state, Kentucky, they couldn't get a ban. I mean, I don't really see, 30 years from now, I can't see women losing any rights. Again, I'm saying 30 years from now. I can't see it. The trend to me seems insanely obvious.
No, I feel like the trend is the exact opposite of what you're saying. I mean, right now we're seeing across the country different practices and books, etc., being banned, books and practices written and developed by women. And so if like for instance, critical race theory, one of the leading critical race theory scholars that we all know is Kimberly Crenshaw, a really important legal race-based scholar who developed this apparatus of being able to analyze what's going on in our society, so that we're better able to.
Isn't she literally a multimillionaire?
But follow me though. It's not about her as an individual. It's about the fact that women can produce the tools to identify their suffering and the suffering of other people, and those tools can then be banned. So then a woman cannot say when she goes into a supposed court that that's why she developed it, by the way, because a black woman who was experiencing discrimination in her workplace was denied the ability to say, I'm being discriminated against because I'm a woman and a black woman. They were like, no, either you are bringing a case as a black person or as a woman. And because that company, I can't remember what it's called right now, had hired white women and black men, the judge threw out her discrimination case. Because the judge was not able to reconcile or to add those lenses, like I was saying earlier, the fact that I can be intersectionally impacted by different phenomena. And a concept like critical race theory helps us get there. And if those kinds of practices are being relegated as woke, and woke is being relegated as some kind of anti-white, anti-American, anti-capitalist for no reason, sort of propaganda tool and not an analytical tool, then we are less able to solve our problems because we're less able to articulate and understand what actually is the problem. So I would say that I think you should do a little bit more reflection about the fact that over 50 years of court protection for the right to bodily autonomy for women and people that can have children, suddenly it's gone. 50 years.
But it's not gone.
But it is.
You and I both, hold on. You and I both live in New York State. Hold on. You and I both live in New York State.
Okay.
You know there is no change in women's rights in New York State, and that's going to eventually go through all the states. Yeah, they banned some books in one state, not in 50. And on top of that, Crenshaw is a millionaire. I mean, she's at a university now, right? Isn't she in a university right now?
I don't know which university.
She's teaching in universities now. I think you're far too pessimistic.
No,
far too pessimistic.
I think you're not hearing me. So number one, it should not be up to the state by state to determine if anybody has the right to deal with their body with how they want to. Now, especially whenever this is not like a communicable airborne disease like COVID-19. This is about a fetus or a clump of cells or whatever you want to call it growing inside of a person that they don't want. And then the state gets to say that you don't get to take it out. And you're telling me that because we live in New York State, as if somehow we are safe from state transformation, because that can't happen, like we almost saw happen whenever Lee Zeldin almost beat Kathy Hochul because she leaned into the right-wing frameworks I've been talking about all night in the later stages of her campaign. So my point is that these things are not guaranteed, number one. And number two, the onus of freedom should be, and here's where I agree with the classical republicanism here. Like, it should be up to me to decide if I want to get an abortion or not. Like, I shouldn't have to travel states because that also presupposes ability to do so. And this is about freedom. And one of the core elements of freedom is the ability.
Hold on. We're arguing for nothing. I'm not saying you're wrong in anything you said. In fact, what you just said, I'm going to take it as you just endorsed me for governor. So thank you. Even if you didn't say that, I'm going to take it that way. What I'm saying here is, I think you're too pessimistic. I think it's looking good. I'm not saying you're wrong in anything you said. What I am saying is, I think you're looking like the world's ended. I'm like, I don't think it's ending. That's what I'm saying.
So I do think that the world is at stake of ending.
True. Yeah, true.
And I think I fundamentally disagree with you that somehow women can just sort of like kick back and keep it easy, just keep going to work, keep going to school, and everything's going to be peachy cream. I just don't believe that.
I'm not sure I was saying all that. I'm just saying things aren't that bad.
Like
that's what I'm saying.
I don't know if I can say they aren't that bad, because remember, these are also a matter of degree. Like different women have different experiences, and depending on where they live, depending on their socioeconomic status, depending on like many things. And so my point is, like, for some women, I'm sure it's really great, and they tend to fit certain demographics. And also, like, I'm not saying that we haven't had any advancements. And what I'm saying is that those advancements are not from the goodwill of patriarchal frameworks or from the goodwill of politicians. They are directly from women, feminine people, conscientious people in movement with them, demanding fundamental cultural and structural transformation. And I think that we saw happen last year, whenever Roe v. Wade was overturned, we saw, again, I use this word intentionally, a catastrophe for everyone in this country. And the true consequences of that moment probably won't be realized for some time. It's not just about the immediate access to this right, because it's about precedents. Like they can overturn that.
No, I get you. I get you.
So, but it's the same court that ruled I wasn't a full human being. So,
Before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to bring up or talk about before we wrap this up? I want to make sure if you have anything you want to say, you want to promote something, talk about something. Guys, always please, he gave us so much of his time. He gave us a lot of love. If you want to give him some love back, it'd be nice. You can follow him on Twitter at Jawanza. If you're listening to this, it's Jawanza, or check him out to see what he's doing on his website. It's JawanzaJamesWilliams.com.
The only thing I would say, first of all, thank you so much for holding space with me. I deeply appreciate it. Like, I'm not so much a libertarian, I don't think. So when I was checking you out online, I was like, I wonder how this is going to go. Because I went to college in Texas, and there's a lot of libertarians around me, and I didn't really know that I was a sort of socialist, like more statist person, but they could sense it. And, so they would challenge me on things. But the thing that I would say to you and to your viewers, just about homelessness, and that homelessness is the biggest eyesore right now in the United States, and about the failures of our public policy, about the failures of the market-based system, that our housing is connected to markets. And if our housing is connected to markets, it's always going to be connected to people not having, because that's how supply and demand works. Like, everybody can't have one, because it shouldn't be in that domain. Right now in the state of New York, 90% of people experiencing homelessness are Black or brown identified. 90%.
90%. I didn't know that. Is that right?
Google it. There are over 100,000 people at least experiencing homelessness across the state. In the city of New York, the last 7 years in a row, in the richest city in the richest country, the richest point in human organized history, 100,000 students for the last 7 years in a row, according to the Department of Education in New York City, go to school at some point throughout the year from a shelter. We have an unparalleled crisis happening in this country, especially in our big cities, and it has nothing to do with progressive public policy. If anything, progressive public policy has prevented it from getting worse. And we see right now in the city of New York, Mayor Eric Adams has moved because of this political theater created by right-wing Republicans from the South, shipping and using human beings as a political tool by sending them to New York City, so where we have to deal with this. And I think that we should be a benevolent city, and we should absorb people, and we should get used to it because of the climate crisis. People will have to be absorbed. So, like, what are we going to build? What kind of infrastructure and practices are we going to have in place? So in 30 years, whenever there's 10,000 people coming to New York every other day, What are we going to do? Let's build a loving, caring system. And that means that we need to protect, number one, our right to shelter. This is a big deal. And the mayor has his crosshairs on this law. And then it's the reason why you think there's a problem now with people in the streets, on the subways. Let the right to shelter expire and watch how that number explodes. But what I will say in closing, we don't need more shelters. We need permanent and secure housing for people. So we don't need.
I have said that more than once.
We need a right to housing. And that means we're going to have to challenge the fundamental structures of capitalism, at least to some degree. And the neoliberal classes.
I'm scared of that one.
Do it.
I'm scared of the right thing, because when the right thing happens, I'm scared of that. But I appreciate everything you said. Thank you so much for coming on. Everyone else who was watching, thank you so much for watching. For those of you who don't know, tomorrow night, I will actually be on Do Dissonance. I'll be on their podcast at 8 p.m. I'll also be doing my show again 7 p.m. on Friday. So you get every day you get me. See that I'm not traveling this time. You get me every day. I appreciate all of you for watching. I will see you all